On a cold October night in 1983, a 23-year-old telegraph operator named Jennifer Allen kissed her mother goodbye, climbed onto her red Schwinn bicycle, and pedaled through the darkness toward the Harlan County Railway Station. She would never return home. What happened to Jennifer Allen would remain one of Kentucky's most haunting mysteries for 36 years, buried beneath layers of concrete, lies, and a community's willful forgetting. This is a story about obsession, betrayal, and the devastating price of silence. Harlan County, Kentucky, in 1983, was a place where everyone knew everyone, or thought they did. Nestled in the Appalachian coal country, it was a community built on rail lines and mining operations where the rhythms of life were dictated by train schedules and shift changes. The Great Depression still had its grip on America, and jobs were precious commodities. Drifters rode the rails looking for work, and suspicion of outsiders ran high. Jennifer Allen was as local as they came. Born and raised in Harlan County, she was the eldest daughter of the Allen family, quiet, dutiful, and deeply devoted to her mother Eunice and younger sister Margaret. Their father had passed away earlier that year, leaving the family to navigate their grief while making ends meet. Jennifer's job as the night telegraph operator at the railway station was vital, both to her family's finances and to the railway's operations. Trains didn't stop running after dark, and messages needed to be sent and received throughout the night. It was solitary work, often lonely, but Jennifer was reliable, meticulous even. She never missed a shift. Those who knew her described a young woman with simple pleasures. She helped out at the local church, kept her bicycle in pristine condition, and wore a gold locket every single day, a gift from her late father engraved with his initials DLH. For Daniel Lewis Harper, her father's full name before he took the Allen surname, that locket was more than jewelry. It was her connection to the man she'd lost. On the evening of October 14, 1983, Jennifer followed her usual routine. She ate dinner with her mother and sister, gathered her things, a small lunch pail, her coat, her purse, and prepared for another night shift. "I'll see you in the morning, Mama," she said, as she always did. Eunice Allen watched her daughter pedal away into the darkness, the bicycle's lamp bobbing like a firefly along the dirt road. She had no reason to worry. Jennifer had made this journey dozens of times. At the station, Jennifer would have unlocked the door, lit the lamps, and settled into her post. The station master, Edward Keller, worked the day shift and would have left by 7 o'clock that evening, as he always did. Jennifer's shift ran from 8 at night until 6 in the morning, 10 hours alone with the telegraph machine, the ticking clock, and the occasional rumble of a freight train passing through. The last telegraph message Jennifer sent was time-stamped at 11:47 p.m., a routine transmission about a delayed southbound freight. Then, nothing. When Eunice Allen woke the next morning and found Jennifer's bed untouched, her blood went cold. Jennifer was never late. She never skipped out. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. Eunice walked the mile and a half to the station herself, her heart pounding with each step. What she found there would haunt her for the rest of her life. The station was locked from the outside. Jennifer's red Schwinn bicycle stood exactly where she always left it, leaning against the building. Inside, through the window, Eunice could see Jennifer's lunch pail sitting unopened on the desk. But Jennifer's coat and purse were gone, and Jennifer was nowhere to be found. Before we continue with what happened next, if you're finding this story as compelling as I am in researching it, please take a moment to subscribe to the show. These deep dives into forgotten cases take countless hours of research, and your support helps us bring these stories to light. Now, back to October 15th, 1983, and the beginning of a search that would consume a family. Sheriff Thomas Walsh was a practical man, methodical in his approach to law enforcement, At 46, he'd seen his share of trouble in Harlan County. Mining accidents, domestic disputes, the occasional robbery. But a missing young woman was something different, something more urgent. Within hours of Eunice Allen's report, Walsh had organized search parties. Dozens of townspeople combed through the woods surrounding the railway station, calling Jennifer's name, looking for any sign of struggle, any clue as to where she might have gone. They found nothing. No footprints leading away from the station, no disturbed earth, no torn fabric caught on branches. It was as if Jennifer had simply vanished into the night air. Walsh's investigation quickly focused on two individuals. The first was Cole Vargas, a drifter who'd been spotted near the rail yards in recent weeks. In the Depression-era South, transients riding the rails were often the first suspects in any crime. Convenient scapegoats, really. People with no ties to the community and no one to vouch for them. Vargas was questioned extensively, but he had an alibi. Several other hobos confirmed he'd been with them in a camp 5 miles away that entire night, sharing a fire and a bottle of whiskey. The second suspect was more complicated. Edward Keller. Keller was 51 years old in 1983, a widower who'd been station master at the Harlan County Depot for over 15 years. He was Jennifer's direct supervisor, the last person known to have seen her before her shift began, and, according to several townspeople, there was something off about him. He watched her, one witness told Sheriff Walsh. The way he looked at Jennifer sometimes, it wasn't right. Others described Keller as rigid, obsessive about routines, increasingly isolated since his wife's death 3 years prior. He lived alone in a small house on the edge of town with his younger sister, Betty Brown, who helped keep house for him. Walsh questioned Keller multiple times. Where had he been that night? Home, Keller said, as he always was after his shift ended. Had he noticed anything unusual before leaving the station? No. Everything had been perfectly normal. Jennifer had arrived on time, they'd exchanged a brief greeting, and he'd gone home. Did he have any idea where Jennifer might have gone? None whatsoever, Keller said, his face impassive. Jennifer was a good worker, very punctual. This is completely out of character. Walsh searched the station thoroughly. He examined the building's interior, the telegraph equipment, the small office where Jennifer worked. Everything appeared normal, almost too normal. The station was clean, orderly, with no signs of struggle whatsoever. But there was no evidence, nothing to suggest foul play, nothing to suggest Jennifer had been harmed at all. And then, 3 weeks later, everything changed. The letter arrived at the Allen household on November 4th, 1983, postmarked from Louisville, Kentucky, a city over 150 miles away. Margaret, Jennifer's younger sister, brought it in from the mailbox, her hands trembling as she recognized the handwriting on the envelope. It was Jennifer's. Eunice tore open the envelope, desperate for any word from her missing daughter. What she read destroyed her. Dear Mama and Margaret, I know you must be worried, and I'm sorry for that. I'm writing to tell you that I'm safe and that you shouldn't look for me anymore. I've left Harlan County with someone I've been seeing. We're starting a new life together, and I'm happy. This is what I want. Please don't try to find me. I need you to respect my decision and let me go. I'll write again when I can. With love, Jennifer Louise Allen. The words were crushing. Jennifer had abandoned them, run off with some secret lover, left without a word, without a goodbye, without even taking her beloved bicycle. Eunice read the letter again and again, tears streaming down her face. This isn't her, she kept saying. This isn't my Jennifer. She wouldn't do this. But Margaret, just 19 years old, noticed something that would haunt her for decades. Mama, she said quietly, staring at the signature. Jennifer never used her middle name, ever. It was true. Jennifer had always signed her name simply Jennifer Allen. or sometimes Jen. She'd never, not once in her entire life, included Louise in her signature. Margaret had seen hundreds of her sister's notes, letters, shopping lists, never Louise. But when she pointed this out to Sheriff Walsh, he was unmoved. People sometimes use their full names for formal correspondence, he said, especially when writing about serious matters. The letter was sent to a handwriting expert with the Kentucky State Police, a man who examined the loops and curves, the pressure points and spacing. His conclusion was definitive. The handwriting matched known samples of Jennifer Allen's writing. The letter was authentic. Case closed. Despite Eunice's protests, despite Margaret's insistence that something was wrong, despite the gnawing feeling in the pit of their stomachs that Jennifer would never abandon her family this way, Sheriff Walsh had to follow the evidence. And the evidence said Jennifer had left of her own free will. The file was marked as a voluntary departure and quietly archived. Jennifer Allen had vanished, and officially, no crime had been committed. If you're listening to this story and feeling the frustration that Margaret and Eunice must have felt, the helplessness of knowing something is wrong but being unable to prove it, I want to encourage you to share this episode with someone. These forgotten victims deserve to have their stories told, and your ratings and reviews help these cases reach more listeners. Thank you for being here. The years that followed Jennifer's disappearance were a slow death for Eunice Allen. She refused to accept that her daughter had abandoned her. She kept Jennifer's bedroom exactly as it had been: the bed made, the clothes in the closet, the small trinkets on the dresser gathering dust. Every week she placed a missing person notice in the Harlan County News. The editor, Robert Moore, eventually stopped charging her for it, moved by her unwavering devotion. Missing: Jennifer Allen, age 23, last seen October 14, 1983. If you have any information, week after week, month after month, the same notice appeared, and week after week, no one called. The townspeople, at first sympathetic, gradually grew uncomfortable with Eunice's obsession. They'd whisper when she walked by, "She needs to let go. That girl ran off plain and simple. It's not healthy." Margaret stayed. She could have left, should have left perhaps. She'd had offers of work in other cities, chances to build her own life. But how could she abandon her mother when her mother had already lost so much? And how could she leave when she knew, deep in her bones, that Jennifer hadn't left willingly? The guilt ate at her. She should have fought harder. She should have made the sheriff listen about the signature. She should have done something. In 1944, Margaret married Daniel Fitzgerald, a clerk at the local coal company. A good man, a kind man, who tried his best to help Margaret move forward. But they stayed in Harlan County, in the same house where Jennifer's empty room stood as a shrine to the missing. "We could move away," Daniel would say gently. "Start fresh somewhere else." But Margaret couldn't. What if Jennifer came back and they weren't there? Eunice Allen died in 1952, 14 years after Jennifer's disappearance. The death certificate listed heart failure, but anyone who knew her understood the truth. She died of grief. She died never knowing what had happened to her eldest daughter. Meanwhile, life went on for everyone else. Edward Keller continued as station master, eventually retiring in 1953 after 30 years of service. His retirement party was well attended. He'd been a fixture of the community for so long. He received a modest pension and spent his remaining years in quiet solitude, tending a small garden, attending church occasionally. His sister, Betty Brown, who'd married and become Betty Brennan in 1942, remained in Harlan County. She became a pillar of the community herself, volunteering at the local library, teaching Sunday school, a grandmother, respected and admired. In 1958, Edward Keller died of a stroke. He was 71 years old. His obituary described him as a dedicated railway employee and longtime resident. There was a modest funeral. Betty wept at his graveside. The Harlan County Railway Station, meanwhile, fell into decline. As truck transport grew and rail freight diminished, the old depot saw less and less use. By the late 1960s, it stood empty, a relic of a bygone era. Teenagers sometimes used it as a hangout spot, but even they eventually lost interest. The building became a ghost of itself. Windows broken, paint peeling, weeds growing up through cracks in the concrete floor. And beneath that concrete, Jennifer Allen lay in the darkness, waiting. 36 years after Jennifer Allen disappeared, a demolition crew arrived at the old Harlan County Railway Station. It was June 1974, and a development company had purchased the property with plans to build a shopping plaza. The station had been empty for years, and it was time for progress to replace the past. James Murphy, the demolition foreman, was a no-nonsense type. Get in, tear it down, get out. His crew of 6 men began the systematic destruction of the old building, starting with the walls and roof, working their way down to the foundation. On the third day, a young crew member named Stephen Taylor was breaking up the concrete floor with a jackhammer when something unusual caught his eye. "Hey!" he shouted over the noise, cutting the power. "Murphy, come look at this!" Embedded in the earth beneath a section of the depot floor about 3 feet down was a bone, a large bone, and it was clearly human. The Harlan County Sheriff's Department was called immediately. By this time, Sheriff Thomas Walsh had been dead for over a decade. The man who responded was Sheriff Ronald Gordon, 53 years old, who'd been elected to the position just 2 years earlier. Gordon was meticulous and conscientious, some said overly so. He immediately cordoned off the site and called in the Kentucky State Police. This was no longer a simple demolition job. The excavation took 2 days. Carefully, methodically, investigators uncovered a complete human skeleton buried in a shallow grave directly beneath where the telegraph operator's desk had once stood. The remains had been there for decades, based on the deterioration and the fact that concrete had been poured over the site long ago. And then they found it, tangled among the bones, tarnished but intact, was a gold locket. When they carefully opened it, they found a photograph of a young woman and a man, and an engraving on the inside. DLH. Sheriff Gordon didn't need to check the old files to know what he'd found, but he did anyway. The missing person report from 1983. Jennifer Allen, age 23, last seen wearing a gold locket with her father's initials. They'd found her. Dr. Patricia Stewart, a forensic anthropologist brought in from the University of Kentucky, examined the remains. Her findings were chilling. The skeleton was that of a young woman, approximately 20 to 25 years old at time of death. There was clear evidence of blunt force trauma to the skull, severe enough to cause immediate death. The injury pattern was consistent with being struck from behind with a heavy object, possibly a shovel. Dental records from Dr. Charles Doyle's office, Jennifer's childhood dentist, whose son had taken over the practice, confirmed the identity definitively. This was Jennifer Allen. She had never left Harlan County. She had never written that letter from Louisville. She had never abandoned her family. She had been murdered, likely within hours of starting her shift on October 14, 1983, and buried right there in the station where she worked. Sheriff Gordon drove to Margaret Fitzgerald's house himself to deliver the news. Margaret, now 55 years old, listened in silence as he explained what they'd found. When he finished, she didn't cry. She simply nodded. "I always knew," she said quietly. "I knew Jennifer would never leave us. I knew that letter was wrong." Then she asked the question that would drive the investigation forward. "Who killed my sister?" Sheriff Ronald Gordon threw himself into the case with an intensity that surprised even his own deputies. Here was a murder that had gone unsolved, unpunished, for 36 years. The killer might still be alive. There might still be a chance for justice. He pulled the original 1983 case file, yellowed and dusty, and read through every interview, every report. Edward Keller's name appeared again and again. The station master, Jennifer's supervisor, the last person to see her alive. But Edward Keller was dead. He died in 1958, 16 years ago, having lived quietly for 2 decades after Jennifer's murder. If he was the killer, he'd gotten away with it completely. Gordon was preparing to close the book on the investigation, to mark it as solved but unprosecutable, when his phone rang. The call came on a July evening, 3 weeks after the remains had been identified. The voice on the other end was elderly, shaking slightly, but determined. "Sheriff Gordon, my name is Henry Quinn. I'm a retired Kentucky State Police detective, and I need to tell you something about the Jennifer Allen case. Something I should have told someone 36 years ago." Gordon felt his pulse quicken. "Go on?" What Henry Quinn revealed over the next hour would crack the case wide open and expose a conspiracy that had festered in silence for nearly 4 decades. Quinn was 78 years old in 1974, but in 1983 he'd been a 42-year-old detective with the state police, ambitious and occasionally willing to bend the rules to get results. When Jennifer Allen disappeared, he'd been one of the investigators assisting Sheriff Walsh. "I didn't trust Keller," Quinn explained. "Something about him was off, the way he answered questions, too perfect, too rehearsed. So I did something I shouldn't have done." Quinn had conducted an illegal search of Edward Keller's house while Keller was at work. No warrant, no probable cause, just a hunch and a flagrant violation of the law. In Keller's bedroom, hidden in a locked drawer of his desk, Quinn had found a diary. "I read it," Quinn said, his voice breaking. "I read the whole thing, and I knew he'd killed her." The diary was a descent into madness, chronicling Keller's growing obsession with Jennifer over the months leading up to her murder. He'd written about watching her work, about imagining conversations with her, about believing they were meant to be together, and then, on October 15th, 1983, the day after Jennifer disappeared, Keller had written a confession. He described how Jennifer had rejected his advances that night, how his rage had overtaken him, how he grabbed a shovel from the storage closet and struck her from behind as she sat at the telegraph desk. He described wrapping her body in canvas, digging the grave beneath the floor during his own shift the next day while a replacement operator worked at a temporary desk, and pouring fresh concrete to conceal it. He'd taken her coat and purse and disposed of them miles away. He'd crafted the letter from Louisville with help from someone he referred to only as BB. He'd committed the perfect crime. "Why didn't you come forward?" Gordon demanded. "Why didn't you turn over the diary?" Quinn's answer was painful in its honesty. "I'd conducted an illegal search. The diary would have been inadmissible in court. Keller would have walked free, and I would have lost my job, maybe even faced charges. I was a coward. I convinced myself there was nothing I could do." Quinn had kept the diary hidden for 36 years, the weight of it crushing him slowly. But now, with Jennifer's body discovered and the case reopened, he could no longer stay silent. "I'm dying," Quinn told Gordon. "Cancer. I have maybe 6 months. I can't meet my maker carrying the secret. The diary is yours. Do with it what you will." 2 days later, Sheriff Gordon sat in his office reading Edward Keller's diary himself. The handwriting was cramped and angular, the entries growing more disturbed as they progressed. But it was the references to BB that caught his attention. "BB says it will be all right. BB helped me smooth the concrete. BB is the only one who understands. BB wrote the words. I copied them in Jennifer's hand." Who was BB? Gordon cross-referenced the 1983 investigation records. Edward Keller had lived with his younger sister at the time of the murder. Her name was Betty Brown. Betty Brown had married in 1942 and become Betty Brennan, and she was still alive, still living in Harlan County. She was 69 years old and a volunteer at the public library, where Margaret Fitzgerald also volunteered. Pause for effect. If this revelation is as shocking to you as it was to Sheriff Gordon, please consider leaving a rating for this podcast. These stories need to be heard, and your support helps ensure they reach the people who need to hear them. Now, let's talk about what happened when Sheriff Gordon went to confront Betty Brennan. The Harlan County Public Library was quiet on the afternoon of August 2, 1974, when Sheriff Ronald Gordon walked through its doors. A few patrons browsed the shelves, and behind the front desk sat two elderly women, sorting returned books. One of them was Margaret Fitzgerald. The other was Betty Brennan. Gordon had not told Margaret he was coming. He'd wanted to observe the two women together first, to see how they interacted, to understand the twisted irony of this situation, that for years Jennifer Allen's sister had worked side by side with the woman who'd helped conceal Jennifer's murder. He watched them laugh together over some small joke. He watched Betty pat Margaret's hand affectionately. He watched Margaret smile at this woman she'd known for decades, this grandmother and churchgoer, this pillar of the community. Then Gordon approached the desk. "Mrs. Brennan, I need you to come with me to the station. I have some questions about the Jennifer Allen case." The color drained from Betty's face. Margaret looked confused, then alarmed. "Betty?" Margaret said. "What's this about?" Betty Brennan didn't answer. She simply gathered her purse, told the library director she was leaving, and walked out with Sheriff Gordon. She didn't ask what he knew. She didn't protest her innocence. She just went quietly, like someone who'd been waiting 36 years for this moment to arrive. In the interrogation room, Betty Brennan sat with her hands folded in her lap, looking every bit the respectable grandmother she appeared to be. Gordon laid Edward Keller's diary on the table between them. "I think you know what this is," he said. Betty stared at the worn leather cover for a long moment, then nodded. "Edward's diary," she whispered. "I didn't know he kept one, but I'm not surprised." And then, without prompting, without a lawyer present, against every legal instinct, Betty Brennan began to talk. She told Gordon everything. She explained how Edward had come to her that night in October 1983, wild-eyed and trembling, his hands still dirty from the depot. How he'd confessed what he'd done, that he'd killed Jennifer Allen in a moment of rage when she'd rebuffed his declarations of love. "He was my brother," Betty said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "He was all I had. Our parents were gone. His wife was gone. I couldn't let him hang for this. So she'd helped him. She'd gone to the depot the next morning before dawn while Edward kept watch. Together, they'd finished burying Jennifer's body properly, smoothing the earth, preparing for the concrete that Edward would pour later that day, claiming it was routine maintenance to the depot floor, and the letter that had closed the case and broken Eunice Allen's heart, that had been Betty's idea. "I knew Jennifer's handwriting," Betty admitted. "I'd seen her write notes to her mother, lists for the market. I coached Edward on how to form the letters, what words to use. I posted it from Louisville myself, took the bus up there specifically to mail it. I thought if everyone believed she'd left on her own, there would be no murder investigation. Edward could go on living his life." "And you?" Gordon asked. "You could go on living yours?" Betty's composure finally cracked. "Living?" she said bitterly. "I've been in prison for 36 years, Sheriff. A prison of my own making. Do you know what it's been like?" Watching that poor woman, Eunice Allen, destroy herself looking for her daughter. Watching Margaret grow up in the shadow of her sister's disappearance. Working beside her at the library, Knowing what I knew, carrying this secret, she described attending Edward's funeral in 1958, relieved that the truth had died with him, yet haunted by the knowledge that justice had never been served. I thought about confessing 1,000 times, Betty said, but what good would it do? Edward was dead. Jennifer was dead. Eunice was dead. Confession wouldn't bring any of them back. It would only destroy my own family, my children, my grandchildren. So I stayed silent. Gordon asked the question that mattered most. If you felt such guilt, why didn't you tell someone where Jennifer's body was? Why let her family suffer? Never knowing? Betty closed her eyes. Because I'm a coward, Sheriff. Because I chose my brother over that girl, and then I chose myself over doing what was right. I've lived with that choice every day for 36 years, and now I suppose I'll pay for it. She was right. The arrest of Betty Brennan sent shockwaves through Harlan County. This wasn't some drifter, some outsider, some easily dismissed criminal. This was a woman they'd known for decades, a grandmother, a church volunteer, a librarian. She'd baked pies for fundraisers, she'd taught children to read, and she'd helped bury Jennifer Allen under concrete and had lied about it for 36 years. The trial began in October 1974, exactly 36 years after Jennifer's murder. The courtroom was packed every single day, with people lining up hours before proceedings began just to get a seat. The prosecution, led by the county district attorney, laid out a damning case. They presented Edward Keller's diary with its clear confession and references to BB. They presented Betty's own recorded confession to Sheriff Gordon. They brought in handwriting experts who confirmed that the letter from Louisville had been a carefully constructed forgery, likely requiring two people to create, one to compose it, one to copy it in Jennifer's hand. Dr. Patricia Stewart testified about Jennifer's injuries, making it clear this had been a brutal, violent death. Margaret Fitzgerald took the stand on the fourth day of the trial. Now, 56 years old, she spoke in a steady voice about her sister, about the gold locket, about Jennifer's habits, about the signature with the middle name that had never sat right with her. And then she spoke about Betty. We worked together at the library for 8 years, Margaret testified. We shelved books side by side. We talked about our lives, our families. She knew what Jennifer's disappearance had done to us. She knew my mother died of a broken heart, and every single day she said nothing. The courtroom was silent. I trusted her, Margaret continued, her voice finally breaking. I considered her a friend, and all that time she knew. She knew where my sister was. She knew Jennifer hadn't abandoned us. She knew, and she let us suffer. The defense, led by public defender Michael Romano, didn't try to deny Betty's involvement. Instead, Romano argued that Betty had been a victim herself, a victim of her brother's crime, coerced into helping through familial loyalty and fear. Betty Brennan didn't kill Jennifer Allen, Romano told the jury. Edward Keller did. Betty was a 32-year-old woman dependent on her brother for housing and support, terrified of what would happen if she refused to help him. She made a terrible choice in a moment of fear, and she's paid for it with 36 years of guilt and anguish. When Betty took the stand in her own defense, she spoke for nearly 3 hours. She described her relationship with Edward, how he'd become increasingly unstable after his wife's death, how she'd been afraid of him at times, how she'd felt she had no choice but to help him. But she also took full responsibility. I could have gone to the sheriff the next morning, she said, looking directly at Margaret in the gallery. I could have told the truth. I chose not to. I chose my brother over Jennifer. I chose my own security over justice. And I've regretted it every day since. She turned to the jury. I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't expect your mercy. I just want you to know that I've been punished. Maybe not by the law, but by my own conscience. I've lived in a prison of guilt for 36 years. If you send me to a real prison now, it will almost be a relief." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Betty Brennan guilty of accessory after the fact to murder, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to conceal a homicide. Judge William Torres, a stern man known for harsh sentences, addressed Betty before sentencing. "You helped bury an innocent young woman and then allowed her family to suffer for decades, never knowing what had become of her. You robbed them of closure, of the ability to grieve properly, of justice. The law cannot punish you for all the pain you've caused, but it can punish you for the crimes you've committed." He sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Betty Brennan, 69 years old, was led from the courtroom in handcuffs. She would never be a free woman again. Betty Brennan died in prison in 1979, 5 years into her sentence. The official cause was a heart attack, but those who knew her said she'd simply given up. The weight of 36 years of secrecy, followed by public exposure and imprisonment, had finally crushed her completely. Henry Quinn, the retired detective who'd finally revealed Edward Keller's diary, died 6 months after the trial in March 1975. He'd lived just long enough to see justice, however imperfect, finally served. Jennifer Allen was laid to rest properly in November 1974 in a plot next to her mother and father in the Harlan County Cemetery. Margaret Fitzgerald arranged every detail of the funeral, making sure her sister had the dignity in death that had been stolen from her. The headstone read, "Jennifer Allen, 1915 to 1983, taken too soon. Finally home." Margaret herself died in 1982, at the age of 63. Some said she'd never really recovered from learning the full truth, that the woman she'd worked beside, laughed with, trusted, had been complicit in her sister's murder all along. The old railway station site where Jennifer had been buried for 36 years became the Harlan County Shopping Plaza in 1976. Today, people shop for groceries, get their hair cut, and buy birthday cards on the ground where Jennifer Allen's body once lay hidden beneath concrete. Most of them have no idea. The Allen family house was sold after Margaret's death. Jennifer's bedroom, preserved for decades as a shrine, was finally emptied, painted, and converted into a home office. The new owners never knew the history contained within those walls. Edward Keller's diary is kept in the Kentucky State Police archives, along with the case file, Jennifer's locket, and the forged letter from Louisville. Occasionally, true crime researchers request access to examine these artifacts of a murder that went unpunished for 36 years. So what do we take away from the story of Jennifer Allen? In many ways, this is a story about the illusion of justice. Edward Keller, the man who murdered Jennifer, never faced consequences. He lived a quiet, unremarkable life, retired with a pension, and died peacefully in his sleep. The real punishment fell on everyone around him. On Jennifer, obviously, who lost her life at just 23 years old. On Eunice Allen, who died of grief never knowing what happened to her daughter. On Margaret, who lived her entire adult life haunted by unanswered questions. Even Betty Brennan's eventual imprisonment feels hollow, too late, too little, for a woman who'd already lived freely for decades while Jennifer lay buried beneath concrete. This case also reveals something uncomfortable about small-town communities and the secrets they keep. How many people in Harlan County suspected something was wrong but said nothing? How many noticed Edward Keller's behavior but dismissed their concerns? How many times did the instinct to avoid trouble, to not cause problems, to not accuse a respected community member, allow injustice to fester? And yet, there's something to be said for persistence. Margaret Allen Fitzgerald never stopped knowing her sister hadn't left willingly. She never accepted the official narrative. And while she didn't live to see full justice, Edward Keller was beyond punishment. She at least received answers. Sometimes, that's the most we can hope for in these cases. Answers, closure, the knowledge that the truth finally came to light. Today, if you drive through Harlan County, Kentucky, you'll find a small town that's changed dramatically since 1983. The coal industry has declined. The railroad sees a fraction of its former traffic. The shopping plaza where the old station once stood is beginning to show its age. But Jennifer Allen's story persists. Local historians keep her memory alive. Her case is taught in Kentucky criminal justice programs as an example of forensic archaeology and cold case investigation. And occasionally, someone places fresh flowers on her grave, a reminder that even decades later, even after everyone directly involved has passed away, some stories refuse to be forgotten. Jennifer Allen deserves to be remembered, not just as a victim, but as a real person. A 23-year-old woman with a life ahead of her, with people who loved her, with dreams we'll never know about. She was meticulous about her work, devoted to her family, and attached to a gold locket her father gave her. She didn't choose to become the center of a true crime story. That choice was made for her on a cold October night in 1983 by a man who believed his obsession gave him ownership over her life. But her story, the truth of what happened to her, that's something we can choose to remember. Thank you for listening to The Cold Case Grim Files. If this story moved you, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, rate and review the story. It helps more people discover these forgotten cases and ensures these victims are never truly forgotten. Until next time, remember, the past may be buried, but the truth has a way of rising to the surface.